Let's take you back to outside Parliament now in the parliamentary precinct. Nompu Siziba is counting down to the 2021 budget speech this afternoon. Nompu, what's the latest?
Thanks very much, Desiree. Well, of course, it's a big day. Finance Minister Tito Mboweni to deliver his 2021 budget speech. And of course, he's got to juggle several balls. We don't have enough revenue coming in. Of course, there has been an improvement in the last few months, which has seen the shortfall in the fiscal budget improve. But we still have a gaping fiscal budget. And of course, the government needs to bring in measures to spearhead economic growth. We've heard about the economic reconstruction and recovery plan from the president in October. We did speak earlier to Sifiso Buthelezi talking about how certain measures have been put in place to ensure that indeed the economy keeps ticking along. But of course, South Africans are tired. They want to actually see evidence on the ground for themselves that they are improving. We've heard that in the fourth quarter, unemployment actually went up. We see the official level of unemployment now at 32.5%. When you take into account the expanded definition, that is people who, which includes people who are now described as discouraged workers. They're able to work, but they've given up looking for work. That goes up to something like 42 point something percent. So we're in a really terrible situation where 11.1 million people are without work. Government keeps on spending more money on grants. Ideally, we need to move to a situation where the people are being more productive and fewer people actually receiving grants. But this is where we are at the moment. So in terms of some response and some suggestions, I'm now going to speak to Nqabayomzi Kwankwa. He's a member of the United Democratic Movement to get his thoughts. Thank you so much, sir, for joining us. A lot going on, of course, in the budget. The finance minister having to juggle many balls, as I've said. What do you think need to be his key priority, especially in light of the fact that the tax take has improved a little bit more, but of course he can't afford to relax, can he?
Yes, no, thank you very much. That's an important question for us. I mean, I had the minister and his government talking about fiscal consolidation. Consolidating what? At the time when our people are starving, at a time when there's massive unemployment. I mean, if you know and believe about Keynesian economics, it is the time now, because the economy is in recession, deep recession, it's struggling. It is to spend the economy out of recession. Is as simple as that. But the expenditure needs to be targeted. It needs to be sector specific, target sectors that are labor intensive. I want to give you an example. There is a good intervention which was made by government last year, the loan guarantee scheme. Why is the take-up of that scheme very low? It's because of the cumbersome and the stringent conditions that have been put on it. Companies are going belly up in South Africa. People are losing jobs, but you've set aside 200 billion rands in order for you to bail out companies that are struggling financially. Greyhound, restaurants in Cape Town have closed. All over the country, people are unemployed. What is that scheme for? We need a proper account of the government stimulus package, because it can't just be a stimulus package like it's manna from heaven, where it's not targeted. To say which sectors did that money go into, what was the impact, for an example, both in terms of the socio-economic impact, the social impact, who was employed, how many jobs were saved. You need a detailed report on the 500 billion rands. We don't even know whether it was actually used for what it was intended at this point in time. You have issues that have to do with the vaccine, where there's no proper accountability about where the money is coming from. We need to know where the money has been reallocated, from which budget lines and budget items, and how those funds, those items and lines are going to be funded in future. I want to give you another example. Last year they spoke about infrastructure-led growth, but they took money away from maintaining infrastructure. If you were to look at fiscal formation, capital formation rather, in South Africa, it has declined over the years. So what are you talking about when you say infrastructure-led growth?
Yes.
It's nice sounding speeches, but that are not followed up by implementation.
That's right. You talk about Keynesian interventions and spending our way out of recession, out of depression, if you like. But what about the debt story? That is a real story. We're an emerging economy, and if we start reaching debt to GDP levels that are considered or deemed not appropriate by the powers that be in the world, I say that because, of course, the other economies, your Japanese Japanese economies, your European economies, they can have a debt to GDP of 140, 170%, but it's okay. But for us, if we're heading towards 100%, the alarm bells go off and it has consequences for us on the debt markets. So how do we deal with that reality that we can't run away from?
Well, by saying we shouldn't fiscally consolidate, I didn't mean that we should be reckless or cavalier with the public monies.
Yeah.
But the point we are making is that if you are able to close the gap on some wasteful expenditure in government, you'll be able to have resources that you can use to try and stimulate growth, but target specific sectors in the economy. We can't be shouting or talking about English or fiscal consolidation at the time when people are unemployed and starving. So do we fiscally consolidate to the point where people are all unemployed? I don't even know why we talk as the UDM. We don't even know why we talk about the strict definition and the expanded definition of unemployment. We have more than 40% unemployment rate. The other nonsense is trying to distort and to understate the unemployment rate, because I'm discouraged as a work seeker because I can't find jobs, because government can't create jobs. So whose problem is it? Is it mine? The job seeker's problem that I'm discouraged, or is it the government's problem? It's a policy issue. Now, it makes the government to focus on other issues. You mustn't forget that the debt to GDP ratio is as high as it is because during the Zuma years, they borrowed 1.3 trillion South African rands. But were they able to make a dent in the unemployment rate with that money? Nope. Were they able to reduce the level of inequality with that money? Nope. If you'll recall, even the same president, Cyril Ramaphosa, said about 500 billion rands of that went to state capture. So we wasted money. Imagine if we had used 500 billion rands and even more that has been stolen from the state to try and reignite growth, to try and create jobs. Where would we be today? We would even if the debt to GDP ratio is high, the unemployment rate would be low, much lower, and levels of inequality would be lower. Even levels of poverty in South Africa would be lower. Where we are today, because of all the bad policy choices and the bad decisions that have been made by government, we mustn't mince our words.
What do you say to those, particularly in the private sector, who say part of the reason why we have such a high unemployment rate is because of a very rigid labour system? What are your thoughts around that? What do you think that actually means?
Those private sector people are silly. They want to be able to fire people willy-nilly. I know them. You see, the problem is that you need to have some level of regulation and protection for the labour. It can't be a free-for-all. Remember, the private sector, their motive is the profit motive. They want to make money at all costs. That's why you have in Cape Town, in all companies that you go to, it can be petrol stations, it can be restaurants. They don't employ South Africans at all. Why? Because of exploitation. They want to underpay foreign nationals, and it's an issue that we're failing to address as government. And then we wait until there's a flare-up of xenophobic violence and we condemn in the strongest possible terms. We hold press conferences, and then after that we run away to our fancy offices without addressing the real issue. The private sector needs to come around to the table and we have a discussion about what level of regulation is required in order for the market to be able to function properly. But it seems like what the private sector says, it wants no regulation whatsoever so that it can do as they please, so that they can continue to make more money while our people are becoming poorer and poorer. Then how do you redress past imbalances and backlogs in a system like that? Yeah,
very good question indeed. And just in terms of the Finance Minister's speech this afternoon, what do you think he has to really highlight that needs to happen and that we need to see follow through going forward?
It's economic growth. Remember, the only way that you can reduce your debt to GDP ratio is by growing the economy.
That's right.
The only way you can be able to make a dent in the unemployment ratio, is by growing the economy, but making sure that you don't have jobless growth. But it needs commitment of all the sectors of society. It needs the business community, everyone, to make the economy work, not just government. But you see, the problem with the ANC, they've got the best policies, but what they don't do is they don't follow up with implementation. There's no discipline in the system. It is not as if the policies that they've been proposing in the past would not have worked if they had not implemented them. If they had implemented them, the problem is that they will come out, the minister is likely to come out with a good speech, good proposals, but I can assure you next year we'll be discussing the same issues. Even when it comes to SOEs, we keep on saying we're going to address them, the governance issues, we speak nice English and then we do nothing about it.
Nice English indeed. But why is that? Do you think it's a capacity issue? Because surely, hand on heart, we all want the country to thrive and move forward, even if we are politicians who people don't necessarily trust all the time. So why is it? Where's the gap? Why aren't we able to follow through?
It's political will. I mean, look at President Cyril Ramaphosa's cabinet. Some of the people are sleeping on duty, but he has not reshuffled his cabinet. Some of the departments are performing poorly, but he's not even reshuffled his cabinet. There are no consequences for poor performance. We've lowered the bar. It's not even at knee level, it's at ankle level. That's the problem in South Africa, where people aren't performing, where people are not implementing the decisions and the policies of government. There should be consequences for that. That's why you have DGs who are also sleeping on duty, who come to meetings in Parliament. At times, some of the board chairpersons, they come to meetings in Parliament to account, but all they do is to present the CEOs of companies to do the presentation, and the CEOs would present someone else to do the presentation because they don't know what they are talking about.
Thank you very much for joining us, as always.
Thank you kindly.
Nqabayomzi Kwankwa, he's a member of Parliament for the United Democratic Movement, just giving us his views there, and of course loaded views there around why we're not moving from ideas to actual transformation of the economy. And of course, very worrying that he's saying that many officials come to Parliament and literally sleep on the job. We need people to be active, to be awake, and to be passionate, and actually ensuring that we have a better tomorrow here in South Africa. And of course, we're tired as business journalists of talking and talking about the same things over and over, and hopefully we do see things turn. Otherwise, if we quote the likes of Zwelinzima Vavi, who talks about a ticking time bomb in this country where we have a level of unemployment over 40%, and people who do have jobs being working poor, the future is not bright at all, and we do hope that indeed things do turn around. Well, for now, Desiree, I'm going to hand over to you, and of course we'll have more as the day progresses.
We'll be coming back to you in a bit. Thank you so much, Nompu Siziba. Let's take a break as we chase the top of the next hour.